elbows out racing, a fuel mileage thriller that didn't quite get to fully play out, and American muscle returning to victory lane for the first time in a year.
Yeah, Imsa's trip north of the border sure was a great one.
And it left us with plenty to talk about. This is your CTMP post-race report. Yes, one of the talking points heading into the weekend was the lack of GTP cars making the trip to CTMP. But I'll tell you what, that did not deter a huge crowd from making the trip out to the track for what turned out to be another great race. Changing up the format for this a little bit, so let me know what you think down in the comments. But today we're going to be starting things off with the LMP2s. I mean, from the drop of the green flag, they put on a great show. Right off the bat, the pole-sitting number 99 AO Racing entry picked up a drive-through penalty for changing lanes before the green flag. And considering that it is a little bit difficult to pass at CTMP, this really put them behind the 8 ball very early in the race. Throughout the course of the race in the LMP2 class, we also saw a couple of key incidents, one of which significantly impacted the end of the race. The first one was for the number 20 MDK Motorsports entry, which found itself lodged in the turn 8 barriers. Not unusual for a car to go off there, but that brought out a full course yellow. And later in the race, Ryan DL, driving the number 18 Era Motorsports entry, went off into the wall in the same corner. This incident, being so late in the race, really had an impact on some fuel strategy, which we'll touch on in just a moment. However, despite these two incidents though, you can't let that overshadow some of the great racing that we saw in this class throughout the race. We saw a bit of elbows out racing in this one. Like I said, we saw some fuel mileage really play a role, or looked like it was going to play a significant role in the race. And ultimately, just good battles throughout the beginning and middle stints of this race, as well as a pretty classic Imsa shootout right at the end of the race. We also saw traffic management be a really key factor in this race, with the LMP2 cars not able to get around the GTD class cars quite as easily as the top class GTPs usually do. And at the end of it, while one car dominated on paper, this was far from a runaway victory for them. The 52 PR1 Matheson Motorsports entry took the lead on lap 10 of this race, and would go on to lead a majority of the laps in this one. And if it hadn't been for that late race full course yellow that I talked about just a moment ago, I think we probably would have had a significantly different result in this class. The number 74 Riley Motorsports entry had been counting on a bit of a fuel mileage race throughout the middle and closing stints of this race. They believed that they had saved enough to the point where they wouldn't have to make a final pit stop in the closing laps of this race for a splash of fuel, whereas many of their other class competitors would have had to. It's very likely that without this full course yellow, they would have won the race. However, in the end, it was not the 74 Riley that took the win, it was the 52 PR1 Matheson Motorsports entry of Nick Bruhl and Tom Dillman, who took the win after they led 97 of 117 laps. Rounding out the podium was the points leading number 74 Riley Motorsports entry, still not a bad day for them, and the number 11 TDS Racing entry. One of the bigger surprises though that we saw in this class was that the GTP class drivers perhaps didn't get the results that many of us thought they might. Felipe Albuquerque finished 5th, Renger van de Zande finished 6th, Colin Braun, who I guess kind of counts here as a former GTP driver, finished 7th, Luis Delatraz finished 8th, and Pipo Derani finished 9th. Certainly not the results that you would have expected from these drivers at the beginning of the weekend. I think these results that we saw largely just go to show how competitive the LMP2 class is. And not only that, but just the high quality of drivers that we have on a full-time basis in that class. Regardless though, at the end of the day, I think this class delivered a really great race. And it certainly was great to see them get a little bit more of the TV spotlight that they deserve. Meanwhile, GTD Pro was much like the LMP2 race. They featured some great battles throughout this one, but also like the LMP2s, there was a big incident in this class that likely impacted the results. 41 minutes into the race, the number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW got into the back of Ore Fadani on the exit of turn 3, dumping the number 13 AWA Corvette into the tires hard and ending their race. The incident would bring out a full course yellow and ultimately lead to a penalty for the number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW. and took one of the faster cars in this class out of contention for the GTD Pro win. Brian Sellers, who was in the car at the time, had this comment in Sports Car 365. He said, "I feel disappointed in the incident with the number 13 and the contact I made that basically ruined my race and theirs. Unfortunately, these things happen in racing sometimes. We strive to be better every weekend. We have to do better." Now, of course, you hate to see incidents like this happen. And you really do have to feel for Fidani here. This was a home race for him and the AWA team as well. But you also have to respect Sellers for owning up to this mistake. Good on him for doing that, and while it doesn't take any of the sting away for the number 13 team, and hopefully everybody can move on from it. Outside of that incident though, it basically came down to a two manufacturer hunt at the end. Lexus, who showed great speed earlier in the weekend, was never really quite up to the pace of the Corvettes and the Mustangs, and in fact they would eventually retire from the race late in the going due to some engine difficulties. But in the GTD Pro class, it was Ford and Chevy duking it out. In the end though, it was a great day for Corvette as they would cross the line first and second for the Z06 GT3R's first Imsa win. The number 3 of Antonio Garcia and Alexander Sims took the win after leading 109 of 113 laps. The sister number 4 Corvette would cross the line in second, and rounding out the podium was the 77 AO Racing and Rexy Porsche, who increased their championship points lead on a day where they were fast, but not quite fast enough to challenge those Corvettes. Also, honorable mention here to the number 64 Multimatic Ford. They were in the hunt with Corvette throughout the middle stages of this race. They faded a little bit towards the end and they finished just off of the podium here in 4th. In GTD, we also saw a little bit of dominance here from one car, as the number 27 Heart of Racing Aston Martin of Romain DeAngelis and Spencer Pumpelly would take the win after leading 72 of 112 laps. They beat out the 57 Windward Racing Mercedes and the number 70 Inception Racing McLaren, who rounded out the podium. This class had a fairly typical GTD race with plenty of comers and goers from the beginning, the middle, to the end stages of this one. Turner Motorsports had a good race and showed really good pace throughout this one, although they would eventually finish just off the podium in 4th. And after falling back in the GTD class early in this race, number 78 and number 45 Lamborghinis both rebounded for a solid second half of this race to pick up some positions. And honestly, with the pace that they were showing at times, I think if a couple of things had gone a little bit differently, then they definitely could have been in contention for a podium as well. Also on track this weekend with the WeatherTech Championship were some of the support series. The Michelin Pilot Challenge was won by Stephen McAleer and Trent Hidman in the number 28 RS1 Porsche. The number 19 Vanderstar Racing Aston Martin and the number 46 Team TGM Aston Martin rounded out the podium. In TCR, it was Harry Gottsacker and Robert Wickens who took the win in the number 33 Brian Herta Autosport Hyundai. Number 93 Montreal Motorsport Group Honda came home in second, with the number 76 Brian Herta Autosport Hyundai rounding out the podium. Notable in this one was the number 17 Unitronic JDC Miller Motorsports Audi having to retire from the race with a mechanical issue. There it means the points battle tightens up between them and the number 76 Brian Herta Autosports Hyundai, as the points lead is down to just 150 points. In the GS category, the number 56 Aston Martin of Team TGM leads by 330 points. The VP Sports Car Challenge saw a little bit of controversy here in race 1, as the looked-to-be race winner, Jagger Jones, who crossed the line first, would later be moved to the back of the class after they failed post-race tech for having too much camber in the car. Instead, it was Stephen Agacani who took the win in race 1, while in GSX it was Jack Polito, who I said in the preview would be a force, as he picked up the win in his first IMSA start. In race 2 it was affected by rain, but Jagger Jones pulled out the win in the LMP3 class, while Josh Green took home the win in GSX. The final support series on the weekend was the Whelen Mazda MX-5 Cup. It was great to hear those cars roaring around CTMP. In race 1, it was rookie Weston Workman who took the win there, which happens to be his second of the season. And in race 2, it was Nate Cicero who brought home the win. Now, I love hearing from all of you on what your thoughts were from each race weekend, which is why I ask on the YouTube community tab and on X whether you thought this was a good race. For this one, 90% of you thought it was a good race, and I have to agree with you. We saw good battles throughout this one. We were in line for a fuel strategy thriller, it seemed like, especially in the LMP2 class before that late full course yellow came out. But instead of that fuel mileage thriller sort of coming to fruition, we had a nice, short, Imsa style shootout right at the end of this race to determine our winners. Now, while I don't think that we'll look back on this race at the end of the season as one of the best of the season, I do still think that this was a great race. The LMP2 cars show that they're more than worthy of being the headlining class in one of these races, and it was certainly very entertaining to watch. Let's take a look at the point standings after CTMP, presented by P1 Web Development. If you're looking for a custom website, then look no further than P1 Web Development. You can check them out by clicking the first link in the description or heading to p1webdevelopment.com. In LMP2, it's number 74 Riley Motorsports entry with 1,308 points. They lead the number 52 Inter Europol by PR1 Matheson Motorsports entry by just 12 points. In third place, we find the 18 Era Motorsports entry who had a rough day at CTMP. The number 22 United Autosports entry is fourth. And in fifth place, 183 points back, is the number 11 TDS Racing entry. In GTD Pro, it's Rexy who extends their points lead. Now it's 98 points, as they have 1,955 points. The Heart of Racing Aston Martin is second, while the 14 Vassar Sullivan Lexus finds himself in third, 120 points back. The number 3 Corvette by Pratt Miller Motorsports entry is now 181 points back, and rounding out the top 5 is the number 1 Paul Miller Racing BMW. And in GTD, well, the number 57 Windward Racing Mercedes increased their points lead even more in this one over the number 96 Turner Motorsports entry. They lead by 340 points. Down in third place, the 32 Korthoff Preston Motorsports Mercedes is 569 points off the lead. The number 34 Conquest Racing Ferrari is in fourth, and rounding out the top 5 is the number 12 Vassar Sullivan Lexus. Now at CTMP, there were a few GTP drivers that shuffled their way into some LMP2 rides for the weekend, but that doesn't really compare to some of the moves that we've already seen in IMSA's silly season. Lucky for you, I have a video that covers all of those moves so far, and you can check it out right here. Huge shout out to all the channel supporters. If you too want to support the show, you can head to patreon.com/offintheS's or click the join button below. Once again though, thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great race weekend and doesn't go off in the S's.